Good morning and welcome to the New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Civil Rights, jointly with Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. At this time, can everyone please silence your cell phones? If you wish to testify, please go up to the sergeant's desk to fill out a testimony slip. Written testimony can be emailed to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. At this time and going forward, nobody is to approach the dais. I repeat, nobody is to approach the dais, including councilmember staff. Councilmember staff, you're gonna have to come around. Thank you for your cooperation. Chairs, we are ready to begin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Natasha Williams, and I serve as chair to the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. Today, we are joined by the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations, chaired by my colleague and co-chair of this hearing, Councilmember Chi Osei. I'd like to start off today's hearing with a quote that not only is important to me, but signifies the importance of the package of legislation we will be hearing today. Many people quote the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr., but not many quote this one. We have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note, insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. I'm hoping that the bills heard today will move us one step closer to cashing that check here in our city. This morning, the Committee on Civil and Human Rights will be hearing intro number 716 in relations to creating a school diversity monitor within the Human Rights Commission, sponsored by Councilmember De La Rosa. Intro number 1073 in relations to the creation of a truth, healing, and reconciliation process, sponsored by Councilmember Hudson. Intro number 1082 in relations to creating a task force to consider the impact of slavery and past injustices for African Americans in New York City and reparations for such injustices, sponsored by Councilmember Lewis. Intro number 1101 in relations to anti-racism training for human service contractors, sponsored by Councilmember Farias. And my own bill, intro number 1118 in relation to anti-racism and anti-racial discrimination trainings for city employees. Before we begin, I would like to thank my colleagues and staff and everyone here that are joined today. Now I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Councilmember Osei, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Williams, and good morning, everyone. I'm New York City Councilmember Chi Osei, and I chair the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. My pronouns are he, him, his, and today our joint hearing includes 3 pieces of legislation that have come through my committee. Intro 934 is sponsored by Public Advocate Jumaane Williams and Councilmember Charles Barron, which is a local law in relation to requiring the placement of an informational sign near the intersection of Wall and Pearl Streets in Manhattan to mark the site of New York's first slave market. Intro 1085, sponsored by Councilmember Sandy Nurse, a local law to amend the New York City Charter and the Administrative Code of New York in relation to public art and school names. And Intro 1150, sponsored by Councilmember Christopher Marte, a local law in relation to establishing a New York City Freedom Trail Task Force. He has a cute little brochure that he brought here today, so if you would like to get a copy, speak to one of the sergeants and he'll pass you one. Maybe. This is for my co-chair. All 3 of these bills speak to the importance of honoring and confronting the history of our city, including history that is rooted in injustices and moral wrongs. It is important for New Yorkers to learn and know these stories and to correct the wrongs that resulted from it. The only way to move forward with our future is to face the past, especially when that past has resulted in centuries of harm. Intros 934 and 1150 are bills that will ensure this history is told so that generations present and future can understand the city's role in the slave trade and the resilience and determination of those fighting for abolition and freedom in the midst of colonialization. And Intro 1085 seeks to right those wrongs. We cannot continue to honor those who benefited from this human rights atrocity and moral crime. As chair of the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations, still figuring out the last part, I have a responsibility to ensure that the stories of our city and those who make up its fabric are told in an honest and truthful way. The three bills heard today will work to reckon our city's role with enslavement and its impact on Black and Indigenous individuals in New York City, and will help tell the true stories of the whole BIPOC community, starting from the earliest days of our city, which will not always be easy to hear. I thank my colleagues for introducing these pieces of legislation. And finally, I would like to thank my staff, as well as committee staff, and others who worked on preparing this legislation, including May Vutrapong-Vitana, my Budget and Policy Director, Christina Yelamati, my new Legislative Counsel, Regina Paul, our Legislative Policy Analyst, and Sandra Gray, our Financial Analyst. I know that that council member, Sandy Nurse, is not yet here, but I would like to pass the remarks on to our public advocate to speak about his bill today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As mentioned, my name is Jamani Williams. I'm the public advocate for the City of New York. I thank Chair Osei and Chair Williams and the members of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights and the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations for holding this hearing and allowing me the opportunity to provide a statement. I want to thank Councilman Charles Barron for his co-sponsorship, and Chris Cobb, who's the person who originally brought this to me in 2014. And in 2014, I introduced 0036, Intro 0036, 2014, when I was a council member. This bill was heard but not voted on. However, in 2015, the de Blasio administration agreed to proceed with placing a sign near, but not at the original location of the first slave trade at Pearl and Wall Street. Today, the signage currently stands in Manhattan Park on the corner of Wall Street and Water Street. I'm calling on my colleagues to support Intro 0934 of 2023 to ensure that we place a plaque at the correct location of where the slave trade first took place in 1711. While I am grateful that the previous administration took the initiative to move forward without the benefit of a local law, it is also necessary for our history to be captured accurately. In fact, two of my staff went out last year looking for the existing sign, and they encountered a senior citizen who had learned about the sign on Manhattan Neighborhood Network documentary. She ventured out on 3 different occasions before finding the sign. This plaque ensures that every New Yorker and visitor knows that this city was built on the backs of the enslaved. Captive African slaves arrived on slave ships along the East River and were brought to the market on this site as part of the transatlantic slave trade. During this time, New York's economy was fueled by slavery. Enslaved Africans used to clear the lands to create Broadway, build the first City Hall, the Francis Tavern, and the very wall that Wall Street is named for. At this very moment throughout our nation, some are introducing legislation to not teach this history. It is critical that people see the connection between what is happening today and what happened at this market. It's been more than 250 years since the market was active, and all of these communities still feel the crippling generational effects of our past. The centuries that followed clearly show the ramifications of slavery transitioning into structural, institutional, and systemic racism. Passing this legislation will allow us as a city to acknowledge the enslaved men, women, and children and pay our respects to the descendants. It is monumental that we permanently document this onto the walls that mark this intersection, along with speaking about it on the record. And I also just want to say, in this time, we have people who want to make believe that the people who are the communities that are doing the best simply did so just out of hard work. And I never want to take away the hard work that people did, but we do know that it was hard work combined with oppressive, suppressive, and an extractive system, combined with a feeling sense of entitlement and exceptionalism. There's also many believe, while they don't want to teach this history, that the Black community in particular, all of their woes in the past. Even though when our enslaved family and ancestors were released, all of the institutions that help you guide you through your life were in the hands of the people who had formerly enslaved them. And it is very, very clear the connection between what's happening in these communities and why some people don't want this history taught. And I really believe and hope that the City Council will pass this so that we can get the history accurately put down where the actual first slave trade market was. Thank you.
Thank you so Thank you so much, Public Advocate Williams. I want to pass it off to my colleague, Councilmember Christopher Marte, for some remarks on his legislation.
Thank you, Chair Osei and Chair Williams. First of all, I want to thank everyone who helped work on this bill, my staff, all the activists, everyone who came to our office in the past 2 years to make sure that we actually can hear this today. Intro 1150, which was set up a task force to establish a Freedom Trail in New York City, commemorating historical sites that were part of the Underground Railroad and abolition movement. When we think of New York's history, we tend to think of early revolutionary figures, like the ones on the walls in City Hall, the mass immigration of the early 20th century, or the fiscal crisis of the 1970s. But there are histories that we must reckon with, like New York Row in the slave trade, and histories we must celebrate, like the network of people who organized for liberation and abolition. The remnants of the Underground Railroad are citywide, from homes of people who helped enslaved people escape, organizations who fought for abolition, or free Black communities and farms who thrived and helped create the city in all of each borough. This bill will help us preserve African American history at a time when other states are trying to erase it. And we'll make this history accessible to every single New Yorker and every single tourist from all around the world. Whether you're someone purposely following this trail, or someone who just happens to walk by a plaque or a site, or a student who might look at a street sign and learn about the real history of this city. Current city efforts have fallen a bit short. There's a few sites that are online where you can learn about the Underground Railroad, or to a much smaller scale, sometimes through nonprofits or for-profit company giving paid tours to learn about the abolition movement here in New York City, but we have to do a lot more. This task force would discover many more sites citywide and hopefully implement a Freedom Trail that can educate the public and preserve our city's forgotten Black history. I want to add one more thing. When we talk about systemic racism, it's shown about some of the things that are forgotten. And in New York City, we have forgotten our row. And so this is the first step to making sure that we remember everyone's history. And so I'm glad that we're hearing it today. Thank you.
Next, we'll have Councilmember De La Rosa, who is speaking on her bill as well.
Thank you, chairs, for this timely and important hearing. I want to offer a few comments on the bill I'm introducing, Intro 716, which creates a school diversity monitor within the city's Human Rights Commission. New York City is known for its diversity, but when we take a closer look at neighborhoods in our city, we begin to see how deeply divided they are. We understand the disparate impact, discrimination, and de facto segregation that are still present in our schools, despite beliefs that we have moved away from a world where racial and ethnic makeups defined our educational, work, living, and social spaces. The sentiment is echoed by the New York City Board of Education's response following the Board v. Brown education decision in 1954. In 2014, the Civil Rights Project at UCLA reported that New York State was the most segregated state in the nation for Black students, with other analysis determining that the problem persisted in 2018 and again in 2021. Many attempts and calls to integrate our schools have failed and demonstrated fear of change and protest. In 2017, then Mayor de Blasio created a student diversity advisory group to address lack of diversity in schools, but was unsuccessful in the full implementation that was further delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic that halted in-person instruction. Since then, we have now also welcomed more than 19,000 migrant students who have enrolled since July of 2022, whose only resource is to integrate and learn in some unfamiliar spaces. With this new population of students, we are faced once again with the question of how to integrate our school, analyze our diverse populations apart from monoliths, increase language access, redistribute resources, and support a population shift in our city. This is the right moment to try a new strategy, and I believe this legislation, placing some of that responsibility on our civil rights arm, will make a difference. It is not enough to move our students around our neighborhoods they do not feel or do not frequent, or provide teachers who do not hold cultural competency to understand who is learning in a classroom with them. We have a responsibility to guide and monitor the transitions to ensure that all students have access to education and do not feel a lack of support. So I look forward to this meaningful discussion today, and I thank our chairs for the opportunity.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Councilmember Nurse.
Thank you, chairs. I'm just going to offer some comments on Introduction 1085. Apologies for being late, Chair. Intro 1085 is a reckoning with the historical injustices that continue to haunt our cities. This bill allows New York City to confront the deep-rooted legacies of slavery, colonization, and systemic crimes against humanity. By contextualizing or mandating the removal of works of art depicting individuals who profited from the slavery of Black people or committed heinous acts against Indigenous peoples, we challenge the celebration of those who have perpetuated oppression. This bill recognizes that art and public spaces are not neutral. They hold power and shape our collective consciousness. By mandating that the PDC create a plan for removal, we are acknowledging and rectifying historical wrongs. The inclusion of explanatory plaques next to retained artworks serve as an opportunity for education and contextualization, allowing us to critically engage with our past. Moreover, the bill's requirement for the DOT to collaborate with the DOE to install plaques adjacent to schools named after individuals who fit the outlined criteria is a powerful affirmation of our commitment to truth and reconciliation. We can reevaluate the figures we venerate and the narratives we perpetuate, particularly within public schools where minds are shaped. This bill is not an erasure of history. It is far from it. It is actually an act of remembrance and truth to tell the entire story rather than the convenient one. It asserts that the stories we tell and the art we display must reflect the values of equity, inclusivity, and recognition of the struggles endured by marginalized communities. So I look forward to hearing from you all, your thoughts and feedback, and thank you, Chair.
Now we'll turn it over to Councilmember Farias.
Thank you, Chair Williams. Good morning, everyone. I'm Councilmember Amanda Farias, and I'm proud to be attending today's hearing to discuss the Juneteenth bill package. This bill package, led by Chair Natasha Williams, Councilmembers Barron, Hudson, Lewis, Nurse, Stevens, focuses on rectifying and resolving decades of systematic racism, as well as reinstituting important practices that will bring lasting justice to Black, Latino, and AAPI communities. I'm proud to support the package with my bill, Introduction 1101, which would require annual anti-racism training for human service contractors in New York City. In a time where we're facing increases in hate crimes across our Black, Latino, AAPI, Jewish, and queer communities, it is critical and urgent that we tackle racism and bias at every level of our city's government. With an increasingly diverse city, ensuring city workers are equipped with a deep understanding of racism and bias is how we equip them to best serve all New Yorkers and ensure those serving them are making the best, just decisions on the quality of life and benefits, services, and resources they're helping attain for them for our city. The more we can add to cultural sensitivity, anti-bias, and anti-racism, the more we can do for everyone in our city. Leading from the front starts with this package. These bills will serve as a primary example for New Yorkers across the city on what it means to be truly anti-racist. This package of bills is of incredible urgency in our city, and I thank Chair Williams and Chair Osei for their leadership on this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Farias. I do want to acknowledge my colleagues who are with us today, Councilmember Farias, Councilmember Marte, Councilmember Nurse, Councilmember De La Rosa, Councilmember Dinowitz, Councilmember Hanif, and Councilmember Moya, who's joined us online. And now I'll turn it over, and Councilmember Joseph. And now I'll turn it over to Committee Counsel to swear in our illustrious guests from the administration.
There we go. Good morning, welcome. My name is Jessica Boulay, counsel to the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. Before we begin testimony, I want to remind everyone joining on Zoom, you will be on mute until you are called on to testify. I will be calling on public witnesses to testify after the conclusion of the administration's testimony and council member questions. So please listen carefully for your name to be called. Council members, you will be called on for questions after the full panel has completed their testimony. Please note that for the purposes of this hearing, we will be allowing a second round of questioning. For public witnesses, once your name is called, if you are joining us by Zoom, a member of our staff will unmute you and the Sergeant-at-Arms will give you the cue to begin. So please listen for that. If you are attending in person, please have a seat at the table to deliver your testimony. We will now call representatives of the administration to testify. At this time, I will administer the affirmation. Panelists, please raise your right hands. We have Joanne Kamouf Ward, Deputy Commissioner of Policy and External Affairs at the New York City Commission on Human Rights. Surosni Banerjee, Executive Director of the Public Design Commission. And Sylvia Montalban, Chief Citywide Equity and Inclusion Officer and Deputy Commissioner, Department of Citywide Administrative Services. All right. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond? Oh, sorry, I didn't write down.
I can just state my name.
Oh, that would be
City of Sherman, Mayor's Office of
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, Mayor's Office of Equity, City of Sherman. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Now, do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
I do. Yes, I do.
I do.
Thank you. At this time, I will invite, I believe it will be,
It's Commissioner Sherman.
great, Commissioner Sherman.
Okay, good afternoon. Chair Williams, Chair Osei, Public Advocate Williams, members of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights, Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and Intergroup Relations, distinguished members of the City Council and the public, good morning. I'm Sadia Sherman, Commissioner of the New York City Mayor's Office of Equity. I'm joined here today by Surosni Banerjee, Executive Director of the New York City Public Design Commission, Joanne Kamouf Ward, Deputy Commissioner for Policy and External Affairs at the New York City Commission on Human Rights, and Sylvia Montalban, Chief Citywide Equity and Inclusion Officer at the New York City Department of Administrative Services, and other representatives of the administration. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the Council's Juneteenth legislative package, which seeks to advance racial equity and justice through truth and repair. This administration is committed to upholding these values as we work to foster a fair and more equitable city. Last November, New Yorkers voted overwhelmingly to embed racial justice in the heart of city government, passing all 3 ballot measures proposed by the Racial Justice Commission. Included in the ballot measures is a new preamble for our New York City Charter, which, for the first time, introduces a set of foundational values that guide how we govern and serve the public. In the preamble, New Yorkers acknowledge the grave injustices and atrocities that form part of our country's history, and the government's responsibility to act intentionally and to remedy these past and continuing harms, and to reconstruct, revise, and reimagine our foundations, structures, institutions, and laws to promote justice and equity for all New Yorkers. The Office of Equity is steadfast and focused on uplifting these profound values throughout government as we lead implementation of these recently passed measures. This includes developing the city's first citywide racial equity plan, consisting of measurable goals and strategies for structural reform across all city agencies. The charter calls on public servants to reorient our roles to bring in practices of repair. With this shared commitment, we express our support for the spirit and the intent of these bills, and look forward to discussing them further with the council this morning. There are 8 bills in this package. I appreciate your patience as we discuss and share overarching comments. Intro 1082, Councilmember Lewis, which creates a task force to consider the impact of slavery and past injustices for African Americans in New York City and reparations. The legacy of slavery in our city and our country requires that we thoughtfully document past harms and integrate approaches for repair. To achieve the most meaningful impact, we believe this bill could benefit from further refinement to align and address potential overlap with 1073, which calls for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the recently passed Reparations Task Force bill that awaits Governor Hochul's signature at the state level. We also recommend extending the implementation timeline and that the start date is timed to fall more than 1 year after the city issues its first citywide racial equity plan. Executing this work with the rigor it deserves requires significant staffing, power, legal resources, research, and academic expertise. For example, California's Reparations Task Force undertook 2 years of work with considerable staff resources and support from the California DOJ. More than 1 year would be required to lead this vital work in our nation's largest city with one of its longest histories. Intro 1073, Councilmember Hudson, which would create a truth and reconciliation, healing and reconciliation process. Our charter's preamble recognizes the profound physical, emotional, social, and psychological harm and trauma to individuals, families, and communities, and charges us to reconstruct, revise, and reimagine our foundations, structures, institutions, and laws to promote justice and equity for all New Yorkers. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions can be a powerful vehicle for promoting racial equity and justice. As stated earlier in my testimony, we recommend that the Council consider refining this bill to address potential overlap with Intro 1082. We also share the same concerns around allowing adequate timelines to ensure appropriate staff resources and quality execution of this work. From a statutory perspective, Bill 1073 tasks the Commission on Racial Equity to lead this work, which may fall outside of CORA's intended focus as presently defined in the Charter. CORA is not written into law as a watchdog or a fact-finding body. As reflected in the Racial Justice Commission's report, CORA was developed in response to New Yorkers who desire to have city government more directly reflect community priorities and, to the extent possible, incorporate community power directly into decision-making. CORA's essential charter-mandated duties include identifying community equity priorities and responding to the citywide racial equity plan. CORA's current composition reflects this goal. This process will require additional resources, access to experts, and ample time. We recommend that the Council consider how to best work with CORA to leverage its resources and clarify within the bill which body would implement the reconciliation process after a plan is created. We support the aim and intent of both bills and would happily continue working with the Council to identify and review paths forward. Intro 1101, Councilmember Farias, which requires the Mayor's Office of Racial Equity to create anti-racism training for employees of human services contractors used by human services agencies. Our city's robust human service sector provides critical social services to New Yorkers in need. It is crucial that those who selflessly serve our city's diverse communities understand anti-racism and can incorporate best practices into their work. We support this bill with caveats. Fueled by the pandemic, the human service sector has experienced considerable strain over the past few years. The administration has worked diligently to improve how we do business with nonprofits, creating a new Office of Nonprofits, clearing a $6 billion in backlog payments, and embarking on the reform recommendations outlined in the Joint Task Force to get nonprofits paid on time. To ensure this requirement is a true value add for employees and New Yorkers by extension, the city would need to invest significant resources and allow ample time for implementation. We also suggest resolving the ambiguity of covered employee by applying the requirement to all employees involved in providing services, including managers. We don't think anti-racism or anti-discrimination should only be for frontline workers. Intro 1118, Councilmember Williams, requires the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, DCAS, to create annual anti-racism and anti-racial discrimination training for all city workers. Agencies can satisfy this requirement with alternative training if approved by the Mayor's Office of Racial Equity and CCHR. The preamble directs our government. Vigilance is required to prevent the reoccurrence of past and worsening of continuing harms. DCAS implements an Everybody Matters training biannually that helps employees recognize the different types of discrimination and racial inequity, introduces anti-racism concepts, and is mandated EEO training. To expand city employee understanding of racism and how it can show up in our work, we recommend that the Office of Equity and CCHR partner with DCAS to help build upon their existing Everybody Matters training to introduce a new and expanded anti-racism module. This module would also help city employees understand the recent racial justice charter amendments and the citywide racial equity planning required by law. We support recognition of the painful history of slavery that endures throughout our city and country today, as well as highlighting and uncovering the often underappreciated history of resilience, courage, and community building by the city's Black communities across generations. In this spirit, the city, led by the Department of Cultural Affairs, looks forward to working with the council to advance Intro 1150 by Councilmember Marte in relation to establishing a New York City Freedom Trail. Furthermore, DOT and Parks look forward to further discussions with the public advocate to identify an appropriate location for the sign in response to Intro 1934 from Public Advocate Williams, which requires the Department of Transportation to place a sign at Wall Street and Pearl Street, marking the establishment of New York's first slave market in 1711. With respect to Intro 716 from Councilmember Della Rosa, which would create a school diversity monitor within CCHR, the city's Human Rights Commission, and Intro 1085 from Councilmember Nurse, which would task the Public Design Commission within 6 months to conduct a public works review and create a removal plan. We have concerns regarding the appropriateness of the agencies identified in alignment with existing efforts and requirements. The administration shares the council's commitment to increasing diversity across our school system and ensuring equitable educational outcomes, opportunities and outcomes. However, Intro 716, which places an oversight monitor at CCHR, is inconsistent with CCHR's core function as a civil enforcement outreach on human rights law protections. Further, the critical work outlined in 716, which includes identifying the complex root cause of inequities, is potentially duplicative of current and ongoing administrative efforts to advance educational equity, including the work of agencies like New York Public Schools and the newly mandated citywide racial equity planning process, requiring agencies to disaggregate data by race, establish goals, and build strategies to achieve racial equity through structural reforms. We support the intent of 1085 to reevaluate, recontextualize, and foster greater diversity in the city's art collection. We should note that the Public Design Commission considers applications related to permanent public art in the city's collection following the process outlined in the city charter, which requires a public meeting and a vote by the PDC, among other steps. The city owns approximately 2,500 pieces of art. The PDC would need significant commitment of resources to conduct extensive research, likely in phases, and begin the collaborative process of creating and issuing new guidance on items in the city collection, requiring significantly more than 6 months to develop. As part of the city's broader efforts to create a public art collection that better reflects the city's diversity, PDC is committed to promoting equity and diverse narratives through art, including partnering with Black Gotham Experience to expand the City Hall tour program, focusing on untold stories and histories and the impact of the African diaspora. The commission recently approved the addition of a monument honoring Shirley Chisholm in Prospect Park, which is the first artwork in a larger project to honor more women in our public realm. Earlier in 2018 and 2021, following the 2018 Mayoral Monument Commission report, the PDC also approved the removal of the Teddy Roosevelt statue at the American Museum of Natural History and the J. Marion Sims sculpture in Central Park. The PDC advanced these actions through its existing application, public hearing, and vote cycle. We look forward to discussing these bills and the full Juneteenth package further in today's hearing. Thank you again for the opportunity to comment and for these bold proposals to create a more just city. We welcome your questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We will turn it over to Public Advocate Williams, who has a few questions.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I appreciate the testimony. Thank you. I just wanted to see if I could drill down a little bit because when they went to put the site in the last administration, it was said similarly that we try to find an appropriate space, but I just want to make sure the appropriate space is on or around the corner because we had some trouble. I think there was some construction, some stuff was happening at the building, but I want to make sure we actually get it at the location. So Is that what you mean when you say that?
Sure. So thank you, Public Advocate, and thank you for continuing to advance this issue. We certainly understand that the current site is a temporary site. It was identified as a temporary site, and so there's immediately after this hearing, what we want to do is collaborate with Parks and DOT to follow up with your office to find a more appropriate site. I think there are some technicalities in the actual bill language that have raised concern, but there certainly is an opportunity to find a path forward to a site that is more visible, more appropriate, and certainly is aligned with what has been outlined. But that would require further conversation with both of those agencies.
I appreciate it. I just want to be clear. 'Cause you said more appropriate site, so I just want to know, can we get it, or is there a reason that we won't be able to do it on the corner?
So I understand your question. So what I'm saying is, I know that site is temporary, and there's an interest to move it to the corner. Following this hearing, Parks and DOT will have discussions with your office specifically on how we can have a path forward.
Okay. Thank you.
And I understand that the goal is to bring it to that corner and the importance of it.
So I appreciate you understanding. I'm hearing, not a definite yes, but we're going to try to get there, just so I'm clear as what's being said.
Understood. So there are some technicalities around identifying the right actual location that's closest to that's at that site or closest to that site, whether it's a building or where that can actually be. And unfortunately, and I apologize that I'm not able to speak to all the technicalities of what's required, but I know that there is a commitment to immediately follow up and have those discussions.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I just wanted to add, like, all the things that we're talking about, in my opinion, and I always like to make sure I say this because people hear different things, but the issues that we deal with now, black, white, brown, no one is responsible for creating them, but all of us are responsible for what we give the next generation. And I think that's a place where we can all grab it, because sometimes people hear different things where we're speaking. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I just have a few questions, and then I'll turn it over to some of my colleagues, and then I'll come back. The first question I'll have, and I'll just go by bill number, is in reference to Intro 716 to create the school diversity monitor. I know you mentioned that it's beyond the scope of CCHR's obligations, so just wanted to know if CCHR foresees any additional obstacles in the creation of the school diversity monitor outside of what you just testified.
Thank you, and thank you all for your work on these bills and the opportunity to speak on these critical topics. So I think, as Commissioner Sherman mentioned, the administration generally is committed to protecting New Yorkers from infringement of their civil rights, preventing discrimination and bias, and that is the core mandate of the Commission on Human Rights, which, for just a little bit of history, was founded actually in the 1940s in response to uprisings in Harlem, racial tensions, and was originally the Mayor's Commission on Conditions in Harlem. That has expanded over time to be a Commission on Unity, and then a Commission on Intergroup Relations in 1955, and currently the Commission on Human Rights that we have today. I want to speak a little bit about our core mandate, because I think that's a foundational piece of some of the administration's concerns around the operationalization of this bill. So as we've talked before with Council, there are really two main functions of our agency. One, we serve as a civil law enforcement agency, so we hear complaints of discrimination that are occurring today, and we work with individuals who have experienced discrimination to remedy the harms they've experienced, whether it's through a pre-complaint intervention process or complaints, and we can talk in more detail about specific complaints in this area. And the other part of our work is really education and outreach on the provisions of the human rights law. So within our area of expertise is anti-discrimination, and within our mandate is all city agencies and private actors in New York City, both as employers and places of public accommodation. So now going specifically to the bill, I think our concerns are really threefold, so I hope this will be helpful. One is about the structure of assigning one individual with a very wide set of responsibilities and focused on one agency within CCHR, which really already has an enforcement function that involves city agencies. So we already have jurisdiction over DOE and instances of discrimination, and we're concerned that the placing one individual focused on DOE at our agency would be a bit in conflict with our law enforcement function. Second, as Commissioner Sherman mentioned, I think in recent years, both New Yorkers who have voted on the ballot measures and this administration have created a new equity infrastructure, and that is just being launched as we speak, voted in November. I think we're concerned, as the Commissioner mentioned, that there is going to be potential duplication of what comes out of the racial equity planning processes and the efforts to involve communities at an agency level. The third thing I will say is really about the role of the individual monitor as it's structured. So the bill requires an individual who has expertise in pedagogy, so how to teach in a culturally competent way, fundraising, training teachers, and data analysis, all of really which extend beyond the expertise we have as an agency. And it is a lot, I think, for one individual. I think we have spoken, and the administration believes truly in the objective of educational equity, and it's an all-hands-on-deck effort, which will require multiple agencies as well as experts in education and families. Thank you.
Thank you. You said you already have oversight over DOE. Has your office processed any cases around discrimination at DOE?
Thank you. Yes, we have cases against the Department of Education. It is my understanding that the majority of those cases relate to the protected class of disability. I should mention also, though, that CCHR is not the only oversight entity for Department of Education at the state level. There's a State Education Commission. There's the Division of Human Rights. There's also at the federal level, the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. So individuals who've experienced discrimination on the basis of a protected category have a plethora of options where they can go, and that's in addition to DOE's own internal mechanisms.
Thanks. And does the law department get involved in those, or do they let you independently investigate?
The investigations that we undertake are independent, so they're done by our law enforcement bureau. Even I don't get to know about them because I'm not in the law enforcement bureau, so definitely independent.
Got it. Okay, the next question I have is on Intro 1073, which is the creation of a truth, healing, and reconciliation process. What do you think would be a realistic timeline for establishing a truth, healing, and reconciliation process?
Sure, I can speak to that. I think for both 1073, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on I believe 1082, I think at a minimum we would recommend that these start at least more than 1 year after the city issues its first citywide racial equity plan. Those requirements implicate both the Commission on Racial Equity and the Office of Racial Equity, and will be, a significant focus of the city and the city's resources, and also, right, will reflect the input from New Yorkers and lay a foundation. So it would be helpful to, one, have the opportunity to complete those and move those forward, and then also have the proper time to stand up a reparations task force and a Truth and Reconciliation Commission with the expertise that's required, the resources that are required, and to also operate those bodies with enough time to really do the work well. We also, I think I shared in my testimony, believe that there's some potential overlap or integration with the two. We certainly understand that Truth and Reconciliation Commissions can look at a variety of issues, particularly contemporary issues. But certainly, understanding the impacts of slavery and reparations in our country still also require us to look at contemporary issues within Black communities and African American communities in particular. So there's an opportunity to figure out, and we would be happy to continue to work with the council to understand timing, how the two connect, and also the right way to leverage CORE, which will really be a vehicle for public engagement.
Do you have a timeline for the racial equity plan to be released?
Sure. So we are working towards a framework blueprint draft in early January, and then a plan in the spring. And then, the commission is still standing up, so we would certainly keep the council updated on our timelines.
Do you foresee any other implementation questions or challenges with regards to the proposed framework? I know you mentioned the potentiality of maybe merging the two bills, but is there anything else in the implementation that you find might be a challenge, or do you have specific suggestions for approaching, if so, do you have specific suggestions for approaching these challenges?
Sure. I think we shared some of the challenges in the testimony. I think we're certainly happy to work through the fine details of the language in the bills and share that with the council. I think we also reference, we're certainly tracking the legislation at the state level as well, and want to make sure that the work that we do in the city, and certainly understanding the importance of the city having its work, right, and leading its own work, but would certainly want to make sure that we are aligned in some way and leveraging the resources of how the state advances its work, with an understanding that the city and the state would need to rely on many of the same experts, much of the same parties to testify, and so we'd want to make sure that it's a value add for the city and the state.
Thank you. And yes, we were told that Assemblywoman Salajas might be testifying, so we're excited about her testimony because we agree that we need to work with the state. Last question on this. Almost a year ago today, this committee heard testimony about the wide range of actions that contribute to the process of truth-telling and reconciliation, including ways in which your office was planning to support such activities if and when the racial justice ballot initiatives pass, which they did in November of last year. How might the proposed truth and reconciliation process relate to your office's plans and efforts in this regard?
Sure. So our recommendation, and I think whether it's the commission or a separate commission that stands up for that purpose, my expectation is that process has some level of independence, and that the city is responding to what they learned from New Yorkers through that process. That's different from the research around reparations, and so I think we would envision hopefully connecting the two, but similar to the way in which we envision working with the commission around the racial equity planning process, where we're listening to New Yorkers, but there's an independent vehicle to engage New Yorkers. We would see the truth and reconciliation process the same way.
Thank you. 3 more questions. I'll just ask a question about each bill. For 1082, what sort of collaborative efforts does CCHR and the Mayor's Office of Equity plan on in the formation and work of this task force? So I know you kind of said it, but if you just can elaborate how you think we could potentially maybe merge, because I think that's what your testimony is alluding to, that maybe these 2 entities can be merged in some way. So what sort of collaborative efforts from both agencies do you foresee in the formation of the work of each potential or one unified task force?
Sure. So I think we would have to develop more of a plan of action as the legislation advances. I think at a minimum, we would want to think about the composition of the body and what's needed. We obviously both operate many task force and commissions, and I think we need to, sooner than later, understand the full resource need and potential impact in order to make sure that it's done well. And so that would be where we would start. And obviously, we would work to then collaborate with the commission and figure out what an operational plan could be.
Okay, almost finished for now. So on to Intro 1101 on anti-racism training for human services contractors. How would the training proposed by this bill fit in with existing trainings and requirements for human service contractors?
Sure. So from our perspective, we would want this to really be a value add, not a compliance exercise for contractors, so that this should feel and actually be something that providers want their staff to participate in and see a benefit from. And so our primary feedback here was allowing ample time, and we certainly can follow up with the council on what we would envision as a reasonable timeline so that we can identify the right training resources and establish something that would be valuable to the providers. I think the legislation calls for this to be available online. We would also look to see if there's capacity to create in-person vehicles for that as well. But at a minimum, we would want to make sure that we have an adequate timeline to develop as well as identifying the resource need.
Thank you. Last question on 1118. How would the training proposed by this bill fit in with existing trainings and requirements for city employees? I know you spoke about the Everybody Matters training that is currently available. So how do you envision reshaping, extending that training in relation to the proposed bill?
Okay, thank you, Council Member, for that question. I can speak to that. So I just want to explain first that we do support the spirit of the bill and want to elaborate on what Everybody Matters does, which Commissioner Sherman referred to. So it is a diversity, EEO, and inclusion training that provides an overview for New York City employees on key principles. Currently, there are 4 modules in it. It has an introduction to EEO principles and protected categories, workplace harassment and discrimination, diversity and inclusion, and racial equity components. We've managed to make it mandated through Local Law 121, and we've created it in consultation with the Commission on Human Rights as well, and it has a lot of interactive components. So there are some effective things that this training has that align with the spirit of 1118. Everybody Matters is available to all the city employees on a web-based platform, as well as instructor-led training that is hosted at the DCAS Citywide Training Center. And it is also a training that we provide to agencies to be able to also present it in an in-person format as a train-to-trainer model. So we are definitely open to and willing to look at how we can expand and build on the content to include a focused anti-racism component that could complement what I've outlined. And that is the recommended approach, because to create a separate and new training would present some challenges both financially and operationally. But I believe that we can work together to create a more enhanced content on anti-racism. And I do also just want to emphasize that we do have an EEO and DEI training portfolio in DCAS for additional focused trainings that support anti-discrimination efforts in different contexts. And that's very important because these resources are necessary because we recognize that our workforce has very intersectional identities where race does overlap with other protected categories. So to give you an example, we have additional the mandated trainings that we know of are sexual harassment prevention under Local Law 92, the LGBTQ training under Executive Order 16, and agencies are strongly encouraged to also complete other elective trainings such as unconscious bias, trainings on microaggressions, disability etiquette training, bystander intervention, structured interviewing, to name a few. So we are definitely, open to enhancing the Everybody Matters, of course.
Thank you. I'll now turn it over to my co-chair, Councilmember Chiose, and then to some of my colleagues who have questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Co-Chair Williams. I only have a couple questions because I know DCLA is not in attendance this morning, but I wanted to ask first, is the Public Design Commission in favor of removing or explaining public works of art that fit the criteria outlined in the bill, Intro 1085? That is, art commemorating individuals who promoted the slave trade or derived economic benefit from slavery, or who participated in systemic crimes against indigenous people or other crimes against humanity. Why or why not?
Thank you, Chair Osei. I'm Sriyoshi, I'm the Executive Director. My pronouns are she, her. So the PDC is supportive of the city's efforts to reckon with its complicated history and the country's challenging legacy. We are committed to promoting equity, dialogue, and healing, and underrepresented narratives through art. As proposed, this bill would require significant staffing and resources and would change the nature of PDC's mandate of reviewing cities' capital projects. We have already participated in the Mayoral Advisory Commission in 2017 and believe that for meaningful, positive, and long-term change, dialogue is necessary. So the inclusion of outside expertise would be wonderful to create such a plan. So we believe additional review should be guided by similar principles according to the 2018 Mayoral Commission of Monuments. So PDC is supportive. The plan itself requires significant staffing and resources, but I would like the opportunity to discuss a little bit more about what PDC does.
Okay. So is that a it depends on the case, it depends on the public work or monument, or is that a no?
In order to explain that, I want to give you a case study example. So during the 2018 Monuments Commission, there was a 5-step evaluation process where PDC did not get involved until the 5th step. So the relevant agency, which had jurisdiction over the work in question, had to complete the first 4 steps. So for example, Parks, DOT, DCLA that own the artwork. So what they would do, they would consider what is being prioritized for review, and the commission in 2018 recommended that evaluation should be prioritized for artwork that sustained adverse public reaction, large-scale community opposition, and 2, once they selected the priorities, they would do a robust historical analysis of the artwork at hand, then seek public input, inclusive of multiple voices, and then release a recommendation. And then the 5th process is, for example, Parks, they submitted to PDC and our commission approved. So in order to create a plan for removal, we would really recommend establishing an interagency task force or monuments to review the artwork. And it's very complex, so it's not as easy to say removal or recontextualization or relocation, but it can be studied, and multiple voices are required at the table.
And the commission is the last step in terms of approving if a work is removed or not. How often do you see, these proposals come across?
That's a great
the
question.
attention of
So
commissions?
there were 61 submissions last year on artwork, and 35 of those were unique artworks. So that included removal, conservation, and new artworks. But PDC sees about 500 to 700 projects a year, so it's around 8% of our current annual workflow. So in order for us to see an increased number, it would require increased resources. But typically we see 8.4% annually of artworks.
But you saw 65 came to your attention last year.
35.
35.
unique artworks.
That's a lot, right?
Yes,
I would
of
say that's a
course.
lot.
Yeah.
How many of those do you think fit the criteria of what this bill is trying to, address? Of individuals who promoted the slave trade? There's a lot of them in the East Coast. So.
Absolutely. So the PDC and the commission supports the city's efforts, and as a result of those recommendations, the New York City Parks and Central Park Conservancy submitted to relocate the statue of J. Marion Sims, which the PDC approved. It was supported. It supported and approved the proposal by American Museum of Natural History to remove the equestrian statue of Roosevelt. And recently, in July 2023, we approved the Shirley Chisholm Monument. So sometimes it's a matter of also proposing new and finding opportunities for expanding the narrative in different ways.
And what about that man in Columbus Circle? Who they have a statue for him.
So we haven't had any submissions related to that, but as a result of the 2018 Monuments Commission, there were recommendations around him, and it was recommended that it be contextualized and new educational opportunities be considered. But if ever such a proposal were to come in front of us, there would need to be extensive public outreach and input and a vote by our commission.
And what you're saying is that infrastructure doesn't exist yet for there to be more public input on.
No, I think that infrastructure is there. The Public Design Commission is a very good place for proposals to come, and then the commission vote by getting the submissions from the agencies, but also the Monuments Commission created a precedent that I think we'd be happy to continue studying, because if a similar type of external group of stakeholders existed, there's a way for us to think about how that may function for this particular bill. We support the intent and want to discuss how a structure could set it up for success, because there's been a lot of precedents. But the personnel and resource issue and PDC's charter mandate involves that we'd have to work closely with other agencies, and they would submit to us. Yeah.
I'll ask one more question, but does the commission support the removal of the Christopher Columbus statue?
That matter has not been brought in front of the commission
Really?
as any particular proposal. However, the commission would support increased dialogue about it and participation in the monuments task force.
I feel like that's like the hottest one. You know? Yeah. I'll move on, but are you in favor of explanatory plaques for schools that fit the criteria outlined in this bill, Intro 1085? That is, schools named for individuals who promoted the slave trade or derived economic benefit from slavery, or who participated in systemic crimes against indigenous people or other crimes against humanity. Why or why not? And is this the same answer to the last question?
So actually, PDC does not have jurisdiction over school plaques, but I will hand it over to Commissioner Sherman.
Sure. So as noted, PDC doesn't have jurisdiction over those plaques. I know that the bill calls for DOT to create plaques. There could potentially be an opportunity for those to be on school buildings instead of actually on the street. Which would then become a matter for public schools to consider. We, certainly can have follow-up and ensure that that's happening after today's hearing. We know that they would also need to have a public process and dialogue with the school community.
Sure. Okay. And about how many public works of art do you anticipate might be identified under the criteria outlined in the bill?
So given that there's 2,500 pieces, 800 of those are outdoor sculptures and 1,700 indoors, there would have to be extensive research to determine that, and the experts required at the table would have to analyze. First would be taking account of what exists and what conditions they're in, because they're located across multiple buildings in multiple places around our city, and then it would require the complex evaluation process. But I imagine, given the time they were created and the complex history, that there would be a lot.
How many people are part of the commission?
So the PDC staff are 6 full-time staff, 1 part-time, but there's 11 commissioners that meet monthly and vote on our projects. They're pro bono and they're experts, including an artist and a sculptor. And on a monthly cycle, we have a public hearing, and it's on the website.
And approximately how, you said there's 2,500 works that are in your purview. Approximately how long does it take to research if someone was involved in the slave trade or the killing of indigenous people?
So for the Monuments Commission, PDC participated, and we hired 2 full-time staff members for a span of a year to help create a database of outdoor monuments. So it took a year to do just a subset of that. So we can have further dialogue and consider how long it might take to create a count of it.
Would you say that there's not really an appetite for doing that research, or?
I would definitely not say there's not an appetite, because PDC already does a lot of that research. When projects come to us, we ensure agencies do the research. It would just be a matter of thinking about how we staff up or partner or consider outside advisors like a Monuments Commission to help support us in doing that. We definitely support the intent and the values behind it.
And what would be some of the reasons why PDC would decide not to remove such a work of art?
It's really on a case-by-case basis. So when somebody submits to us, we take a lot of public testimony, and in that instance, if there's dialogue among the commissioners one way or the other, those decisions can be made. But it's hard to say specifically what those reasons are, not knowing exactly what the artwork at hand is.
Do you have a case study maybe of a particular public work that has come across the commission's desk where it was unclear on if this work should be removed or not?
So that's a very good question. I can come back to answer that, but one thing that I can just bring up, and it's live, is that there's been matters like Marion Sims where there was no one or the other and it was approved. So most cases when agencies have enough support and willingness to remove, we support our agencies because PDC is here in support of agencies. So if DOT, DCLA, or Parks is aligned that they want to remove, rarely does the commission go against that judgment. So we look forward to the narratives submitted to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have more questions, but I do want to pass it off to some of my colleagues. I do want to acknowledge Councilmember Ung is here, as well as Councilmember Louis, and I would like to pass it on to Councilmember Marte for some questions.
I just have a quick, simple question. I want to thank you for the support of our legislation and working with the council to move it forward. We have these really awesome pamphlets from Jacob Morris, who's been working on this for multiple years and in the previous council, and I would love to hand one to you guys if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Great, thank you.
We're not allowed to come there.
Thank you.
Honestly, this pamphlet was the inspiration of our legislation. Imagine the areas and the landmarks that we identified just in Lower Manhattan, but all the unknown areas throughout the city. And so as we continue to work on this potential task force, maybe we could use this as a role model or a guiding light to figure out how this task force is going to look and which areas we should acknowledge. Thank you.
Co-Chair Williams, do you have any more questions that you want to ask?
Guess it's me again. All right, so back to 1073, which is the creation of a truth, healing, and reconciliation process. So public awareness and participation is a critical element of truth and reconciliation processes. Do you foresee any particular challenges in engaging the public in this type of process? If so, do you have suggestions for public engagement that would account for these challenges?
Sure, I can speak generally to that question, recognizing that this calls for the commission to do this work. You know, I think it's hard to have a truth reconciliation process that where people can come forward and share their testimony, but also feel safe in doing so and feel heard. And I know that the bill calls for the commission to create a space that's safe and that can be affirming so that people feel comfortable doing that. I think providing a variety of vehicles for people to share their past harms or contemporary harms and issues will be important so that we hear from, you know, a variety of New Yorkers. I think I shared the current composition of the commission is really focused on what it's been aligned to do in the charter. So, you know, much more focused on planning, supporting a racial equity planning process, identifying community priorities. I think it will be important to have an added layer of expertise, another body of individuals who have experience with truth and reconciliation commissions to make sure that it's done well, or a commission specifically for that purpose.
Thank you. Do you know of any other jurisdictions doing similar work? I know you mentioned California, and if so, what are your thoughts on their approach? Would you consider a similar approach for New York City? Do you foresee any potential coordination challenges if other jurisdictions implement their own truth and reconciliation processes in the near future? For example, as is currently under consideration by the New York State Legislature, as also mentioned in your testimony. If so, how would you approach those challenges?
Sure. So again, I can share recommendations for how we would envision the commission doing that work. I think our office generally, right, as we've rolled out our office and the work of implementing the ballot measures. We certainly have talked to many other jurisdictions that have racial equity offices, human rights. I think we've joined you, Councilmember, in a meeting with San Francisco's Human Rights Commission. So there are many great examples nationally of this work, and we're happy to share some of what we've learned. As well as, right, we know that as the commission stands up and has its commissioners and members, we also would look to draw on their expertise as well. But there are certainly national examples as well as international examples of jurisdictions that have done this well.
Yeah, and I'm also interested in your thoughts on if the governor finally signs the state legislation, how that'll impact the work in New York City. I have started some preliminary conversations with them, but just interested in knowing how you think that would impact the work. Do you think it's something that we would just have to like table, or is there space to work somewhat simultaneously or in congruence with what the state is doing?
Sure. So this is where the question of timing becomes very important for us, and working closely to understand what's progressing at the state. I think there could be an opportunity for the city to leverage the research and the work that's done at the state and further it in New York City. There could also be an opportunity for the city to recommend and shape what the state does, depending on the timing. We do know if this is happening simultaneously, we will most likely be relying on many of the same people and experts, and so we'd want to make sure that these are synced and aligned and feel connected.
Thank you. The next question I have is just about resources, and I'll ask about both bills at the same time. This is in regards to anti-racism training for human services contractors and city employees. So are there any concerns regarding the amount or type of resources needed? I know you both mentioned that it might be a resource strain, but if you could articulate in detail what that would be to develop effective trainings for different types of services and service provision roles, and similarly for the city. Obviously, we're very large and diverse city, and people are doing different types of functions. So how would you envision, and if you can articulate the amount and type of resources you feel would be needed for both trainings?
So we don't have a cost estimate to provide you, but I will say that this legislation for the two trainings, as well as most of the bill package, would require new resources for the agencies involved. And so that's part of our assessment and identifying what the resource need is, as well as the timing, which is part of that consideration. There's something to work from with respect to training for city employees. I mean, my colleague can share more on the Everybody Matters training. I think for human service vendors, this is really developing a brand new training. And, you know, as I shared, this would be something that we want to be a value add, and that actually starts with engaging the providers first and foremost, right, to really even understand the need. And so we can certainly share what we envision that cost to be, but we know it will certainly need to be a new cost.
Yes, definitely, and to echo that, we don't really have any cost specifics right now, but you know, given our experience, we know that it is a very prolonged process. It requires the vendor bidding process to solicit the correct bids, the ability to also engage subject matter experts to find the way to develop the right content. It also requires extensive testing of the content, et cetera, in the right platforms. So it's quite an extensive process that does turn out to be a bit of a challenge and somewhat of a strain on the limited resources we have right now. But again, we would have to study it further to be able to quantify what those costs and strain on the resources would be. But again, just want to emphasize that of course we're going to explore how we can expand the existing training, which may be a bit more cost effective.
Thank you. Actually, just to piggyback on something you said around extensive testing. So through your experiences, are there certain types of trainings, anti-racism, diversity trainings that are particularly effective that could be considered in implementing the requirements of either bill?
So when I mentioned testing, I was mainly referring to the technical aspects of it because we actually have to make sure that the product is able to function on the platform technologically, reach the audiences. We'd have to be able to also test the way we can quantify the completions, et cetera. That's really what I was referring to. As I mentioned before, we have an extensive and growing portfolio of anti-discrimination, training, equity, and diversity and inclusion topics. And so we feel that with the complement of that curricula, we can educate our workforce, whether it's managers, supervisors, frontline staff, on the principles of anti-discrimination in the workplace. So this is really what we rely on to perpetuate, the sense of equality and safety in the workplace right now.
Thanks for the clarification.
And I think I just, you want to go ahead, Commissioner?
Sure. I would just add, I think, and we noted in our testimony, one of the things that we would look to accomplish through this expanded anti-racism component is also educating New York City employees on the values that we now have in our charter, right, and their obligations as city employees to advance a city that's more just and more equitable and addressing racism, also understanding our obligations with respect to racial equity planning, et cetera, so that we are certainly understanding anti-racism and discrimination within the workplace, but then also how we could potentially perpetuate it in our work and the ways to address that.
Yeah, I was really just going to echo what the commissioner had mentioned earlier about knowing the audience. We develop a lot of trainings at CCHR. It does take a long time, especially if you're working with community partners, which I think makes them more effective. And having interactive trainings, we do ours live. We have a few that are web-based, so I think there's a lot of models, and it depends. But definitely on the time front and the resources front, just want to underscore agreement with DCAS colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you. So just to piggyback, and thanks for the clarification. So you mentioned that you have tons of modules already that exist. So how are you testing the effectiveness of those modules? And so do you have any thoughts on the success of those modules, how it's been received, any best practices that can be incorporated to maybe creating or enhancing what already exists?
Sure. And those are very ambitious goals that we actually strive to do every day through my office, Citywide Equity and Inclusion. Again, our constituents are the EEO officers of every agency, right? So we disseminate the information through them. We also partner with our human capital, Citywide Human Capital, who also works with the personnel officers as well, on the importance of using these kinds of trainings. We have a lot of tools where we test what the workplace culture is like. For example, the citywide, climate survey. Right, so we've issued the climate survey. We've been able to assess through the climate survey, which is voluntary, but we've been able to assess the knowledge that employees have and awareness they have about their rights, their obligations, their protections under the EEO policy, their awareness of anti-discrimination and sexual harassment principles, et cetera. So by also having those principles, such as the EEO officers, the agency personnel officers and leads, promote these types of trainings that I previously mentioned, we're able to sort of buttress all of the educational efforts we have on equity and anti-discrimination. And so basically that's how we try to assess the needs, and certainly our Learning and Development Department in DCAS reacts directly to any types of specific needs that agencies have in order to target a particular population or maybe a hard-to-reach satellite operation in order to get them the type of training that they need or present it in a platform that's more accessible to them. So there are different ways, and we try to adapt to the basic needs of the agencies, but we see the reactions from the agencies, and therefore we could assess that there is an awareness and a willingness to engage and keep learning about topics. And as we also gauge if there's an interest in a particular topic, we try to then research how we can develop the training, engage vendors, and develop the content.
This is somewhat of a off-topic-ish question, but do you interact with EEPC at all?
Yes, on occasion we do interact with the EEPC.
In what ways?
So we have a very good relationship with the EEPC. We actually engage them to give guidance to the agencies on their audit structure and the expectations that they have for conducting audits at the agencies about their employment practices. And we actually partner with them to disseminate those principles and expectations to give more clarity to the agencies about that. So there are different ways in which we try to have a conversation about how to work together to enlighten agencies about expectations about employment practices.
Thank you. I was just trying to figure out, because something you were saying, I was like, what does that mean for these other agencies and the work that we do? I for sure don't like duplicity, and I definitely think there are a lot of things that are duplicative, and so at the very least, I try to make sure that some of the things that we aren't doing more work or adding something that might already be there. Maybe some things need to be tweaked or refined. So I do look forward to working with you and talking to you about how we can make some refinements to the trainings. I have a quick question for the Public Design Commission. You mentioned that you would have to take inventory. So you don't currently have a list of inventory of what the different public works are?
Thank you for your question. We do have a list. The list is based on a survey done in the late 80s and early 90s. So buildings shift all the time, operations change. So we need a new inventory of what exists in the interiors of buildings, and these buildings could be schools, libraries, courthouses, and many other places that we may not know if it's still there, in fact. But for the outdoor monuments, we do have a recent survey, and there's a publicly accessible database on our website.
So the public works inside, when was the last time you guys updated the list?
So the list is updated in terms of administration, but from what I understand, we also have a database and an archive which takes consideration all the submissions. So the list is continuously updated for new submitted artworks, but for artworks that are there from, way back, it's just that the latest survey we have is from the 90s, and we would want to do a new one based on how things have been shifting.
So whether or not this bill passes, when does your commission plan to refine or update, I guess, the list?
That is a very good question, and we can take it back and discuss with our leadership and see how to proceed.
Okay, just another clarifying question, just for the record. So in your responses to Councilmember Osei's questions, you mentioned the current process where people can essentially submit for review, possibly of having something removed. So just to clarify, your office does not proactively do any inventory of things that are currently within the public works sphere. You only assess and review things that people come to you about or people submit applications about?
So we have curatorial and oversight over all that artwork. So whenever somebody may want to relocate, find a long-term loan, we are involved and engaged in that decision-making. But it's cyclical how often we do the inventory aspect, because sometimes we may have the resources to do that or grants. Like last time, I think we worked with in the Bloomberg administration or the Koch administration because we had more resources, and that's when we did the inventory.
Was I alive when he was there? I don't even think so.
But
very long time ago.
We can continue the dialogue and see if that's something.
Yeah, I think I just need further clarity because, for instance, you mentioned that the Sims monument was taken down because there was some type of public outcry or, public opinions about it that then led to a review. And then when Councilmember Osei mentioned the Christopher Columbus statue, you said you haven't received anything about it. So I guess that's my question is what is the actual process of the commission reviewing or assessing or even thinking about whether to remove something or even put up a plaque explaining, our own versions of the real histories or just even explaining the history of said person?
So to clarify, the 2017 Monuments Commission was created in the de Blasio administration, and a group of experts came and did a 4-month review of what they thought were priorities of very controversial and complex artworks, including Marion Sims. But they didn't come up with recommendations for removal with each of them. For others, like the Columbus statue, they advised contextualization and educational efforts, but for Marion Sims, they suggested removal. Parks then took that and they submitted to us. So that's why we were able to take the public input, the public testimony, and approve that. So in terms of plaques, we currently also review them and we approve them, but in terms of being proactive, we try and do that through our strategic and special initiatives. Like we partner with the Black Gotham Experience and artist Kamal Wari, he came in and he does a whole diverse tour of City Hall. So we're hoping to increase the narratives through storytelling and through new partnerships with DCLA and temporary artwork. But when it comes to the permanent collection, because it really involves the partnership of other agencies coming forth, they have to pay for the contextualization, pay for the plaques. Each plaques cost between $5,000 to $10,000. So you can imagine that's a decision they need to consider.
You keep on referencing the Monument Commission.
Yes.
Why aren't they? Are they here today? They're not here today, right?
It was a group that was put forth to create the report, and once they created the report, I believe they were done.
That seems.
So it was a task force.
It was a task force, but it seems like a lot of their work is being referenced. But if they're done, then there's no levels of accountability on some of these, issues that we're trying to address today. Has the Public Design Commission taken up some responsibility that the Monument Commission may have had? Is that something that is in talks at the Public Design Commission in terms of being in tangent with a potential future Monument Commission? I just feel like there's a lot of things that are referencing the Monument Commission, which seem to be like obstacles or roadblocks in terms of some of the things that we're trying to address. Yet, from what I'm hearing, they're dissolved and don't exist anymore.
So the conversation has come up where should there be one another, and then we are happy to continue that dialogue to see how we can consider a similar task force. And that's something that was a recommendation out of the report, that there remain an interagency task force. So with additional time and resources, we can continue that dialogue.
So the interagency task force wasn't created though, right? It was a recommendation, but it's not created though, right?
It's not formally created, as I understand it.
Okay, just another quick question, because I think a lot of the work that you might do, or maybe other agencies might do in reference to Councilmember Nurse's bill, have to do with truth and reconciliation. So do you foresee, and maybe not being necessarily a question for you, but for you, Commissioner, do you foresee any type of overlap with that process? Because I think that also has to do with retelling stories and truth around stories and people and places.
Sure, I think there's a connective tissue. And Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a vehicle for people to express what has happened to them individually, their communities, and the harms related to it. Certainly the art and monuments of our city also reflect and can perpetuate that as well. And so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Executive Director, there's a level of independence that the PDC has, which requires it to take votes, right? But it needs to respond to and have an action to vote on. There certainly could be a connective tissue where what is learned at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission propels applications that then go before this body for it to consider and vote. And so there's an opportunity to do that, which still allows the PDC to have its independence, take an objective vote. But the commission itself, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, can certainly galvanize those stories and those applications to bring to PDC.
We're going to pass it off to Councilmember Farias for questions.
Thank you so much, Chairs. And thank you, folks, for testifying. I appreciate your response on 1101 and the support for the bill. I did just wanted to ask, what do you folks mean by allowing ample time for implementation? Is there like an ideal time frame?
So apologies, I'm trying to just reference the bill number. I'm sorry.
1101 in your testimony.
Human Services contract, sorry. So we need to actually figure out that timeline. We don't have that today. We're certainly happy to follow up with your office. I think we are we are aiming for the bills, particularly that call in the Office of Equity and the Commission on Racial Equity, to fall at least more than 1 year after the first citywide equity plan, because that's a charter mandated timeline that we're all working to reach in the near term. And so we certainly can follow up with you and share a recommendation for timeline. And that would include what we would want to have some extensive lead up with human service contractors and having their input before we would even go out to bid for a vendor. So we can share with you what a timeline would be.
Sure, and I'm sorry if I missed it during the hearing. Do we have a timeline for when the equity?
Sure, yes, so spring of 2024.
Okay, so ideally, right now, off the cuff, a year after that feels more ideal, but we'll talk offline. Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and have a great day.
Thank you.
We'll be calling up the next panel shortly.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again, everyone. We will now turn to public testimony, and we will be calling individuals by name to testify. How this portion will work is that you will please begin once the sergeant has started the timer. Council members who have questions for a particular panelist should let me know, and we'll make sure that everyone can ask their questions before the panelist, or once the panelist has completed their testimony. For panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you if you're on Zoom, and the sergeant at arms will give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait at that time for the sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. Now, I think we're running slightly ahead of schedule, surprisingly, but if we have Assembly Member Michelle Solages here. All right, we can come back to her. In that case, we can move to our next member of the public, Jennifer Jones Austin. Good morning. Oh, one other note for everyone. There will be 2 minutes for each member of the public to read their testimony, after which there may be questions. All right, thank you. All right, whenever you're ready.
Okay.
You don't need to be sworn in because you're not a city agency, right?
Correct.
So I've testified through the years in the past, and I guess I always testified as a public official. So here I am in my personal capacity, and I'm honored to be with you. Honored to be with you, Chair Osei. And I'll just quickly let you know that I grew up with your mother and right around the corner on Maple Street in Brooklyn, New York. So it's an honor to see you in this role and just leading and serving. It's an honor to be here with Chair Natasha Williams as well, and all of you. I want to speak for just a couple of minutes about Intro 1101 and 1118. And I represent the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, which is an anti-social policy and advocacy organization that was founded at a time when social services in New York City were doled out based on race and religion. So going back 101 years ago, when FPWA was founded, if you were white and you were Jewish, you were cared for by Jewish faith organizations affiliated with the United Jewish Association. If you were white, in most instances, you were cared for by Catholic Charities. And if you were other, you were cared for by organizations affiliated with the Protestant community. And as one would expect, going back 101 years, the services were not equal. And the FPWA, the organization I lead, was founded to be a voice at the table representing marginalized communities, children, mothers in the main, who were made vulnerable by institutional and structural racism. We've continued that work for 100 years, and I now serve an organization that is centered on dismantling structural and institutional racism in government functioning and in human services delivery. I most recently served as the chair of the New York City Racial Justice Commission. I've served as chair of the New York City Board of Correction. I presently serve as the vice chair of the National Action Network. I center a lot on racism, structural and institutional racism. Passing 1101 and 1118 are critical. They are essential because we've learned through the years, even with legislation aimed at bringing in outlawing discrimination, we find that that doesn't change attitudes, beliefs, behaviors. And when you have people who are in positions of power, whether they be in government, whether they be supervisors, managers, commissioners, frontline staff, and when you have people in human services agencies, whether they be supervisors, managers, or frontline staff, the power differential is significant. And whether they show up intentionally or unintentionally, because racism and bias pervades every pillar of society, they often show up with those biases in place. If we as a city take the critical step forward in ensuring that people have knowledge and awareness of how racism and bias, again, conscious and unconscious, kind of creeps into and is a part of our fabric as a nation, if they have greater awareness when it comes to carrying out their required functions on a day-to-day basis, that will go a long way. We have to help people, much like we're doing presently with anti-sexual harassment training, to understand what racism and bias looks like. It can't be enough that we say that we are not a racist city. We have to actively practice anti-racism and anti-bias practices that has to be embedded in our policies and in the ways that we show up and live out those policies. So I'm here to support Intro 1101 and 1118 because that is a critical first step, and it represents the City Council's commitment to upholding what the New Yorkers, the overwhelming number of New Yorkers just last November said they desire for this city, that we be committed to and actively engage in the work of bringing an end to structural and institutional racism.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Once more, I'll ask in case the assembly member has arrived. All right, we'll come back.
Actually, no. Did the chair ask Jennifer any questions?
No, she was gone.
I wonder if she's leaving, so.
Well.
But this could be the assembly. Oh, yes.
All right. You have questions?
Yeah, definitely.
One moment.
Oh, no.
Okay,
she'd come
no
back.
questions.
She had questions.
All right.
Great.
I think we do have at least a couple questions from the chair.
Hi. Had to use the loo.
Mic.
Oh, my mic's on.
No, not you.
I know you just testified, and I'm sure you spoke about your role as chair of the Racial Justice Commission, and so much of what was presented today came from the Racial Justice Commission recommendations that didn't make the ballot, like the Truth and Reconciliation. So just wanted to know from your experiences as chair of the Racial Justice Commission, what did you see, what did you hear, how do you feel about how we could really implement something like this in our city?
So when the New York City Racial Justice Commission commenced its work, one of our primary interests was hearing from New Yorkers all across the city. New Yorkers who had experienced discrimination and bias, and often at the hands of New York government. And what we found through those conversations, as well as what I learned when serving on the Board of Correction, and even when I served as Deputy Commissioner for the New York City Administration of Children's Services. Very often, government staff, again, many instances unintentionally, bring forth the biases that have lived inside of structural racism and racist policies and practices. And so what we found was that people were talking about being overlooked for hirings and promotions in New York City, just as the City Council demonstrated with a report released just in 2021, centering on pay equity and lack of access to opportunity. There were city employees who were not afraid to come forward in these public hearings and talk about being overlooked. We heard from a lot of New Yorkers that sometimes when they would come to apply for income supports or to apply for permits of various types, that they felt like they were being treated differently, that they were not being seen and heard, mainly because of their color. Sometimes people talking about it because of their immigration status or because of their gender. And so it was this persistent outcry that it's not simply enough to say that you are a city that seeks to undo racism. You have to actively make sure that the workers understand what that means. What I found from what you all put forward as a necessity is the annual element. We have to remember that people cycle through government on a continuing basis. Some people are lifers, and some come on in and then they leave. People are always showing up new in their roles. If we just train people once and not have it be ongoing, we're gonna miss people. Sometimes you train people, you help them understand, appreciate what's going on, but they don't get it the first time. So you have to keep at it. And so what you all are doing here, whether it be Truth and Reconciliation, whether it be the trainings, it evidences what people are saying they need, what is vital to New York City. Very quickly about the Truth and Reconciliation. We realized that we could not, in bringing forth to the New York City electorate an effort to undo structural racism, we couldn't single out every particular issue, but we understood that in order for New York to change, much like the rest of the nation, we had to look to what happened in South Africa with Truth and Reconciliation. People coming forward, those who had been harmed and those who had willfully or unintentionally exacted the harm, to say we understand what's happened here and we want to do things differently. So we were in support of Truth and Reconciliation. We just knew that we could not put to the New York City electorate 500 ballot measures. So we tried to do something that was broad and would actually encapsulate everything, which was in part what the preamble was intended to do, the Office of Racial Equity and the ongoing Commission on Racial Equity.
Yeah, this guy outside, I don't know if he's in the audience, just asked, oh, he is, just asked a question about, like, who wants these things and, who really wants this to happen. I think sometimes there's a common misperception that people don't actually want this. And so I know you all did extensive engagement and outreach. So if you can talk about, and the fact that New York City, we overwhelmingly voted for all of the ballot measures. So if you can just talk about like the work that you all did to inform the ballot measures and truly what New Yorkers want. And I remember specifically when you testified before November last year, you talked about we will see how New Yorkers really feel. And you were optimistic that New Yorkers would want to see justice and equity and reconciliation and want to see forms of harm undone. But if you could just, for the record, talk about a lot of the extensive work that you did that really forms a lot of the bills we heard today.
Absolutely. Let me first just pick up on the last point that you made. When New Yorkers voted for these 3 racial justice measures, we were told that it was the largest flipping of the ballot, the largest number, greatest number of people flipping the ballot for measures, flipping to the back. And what we saw was that with each of the measures, more than 60% of persons voted favorably for them, as much as 81%. So this is not just 1 or 2 people saying, this would be a nice thing to do. This is an overwhelming majority of New Yorkers saying this is not only a nice thing to do, it's a necessary thing to do. When we engaged in the work, when we commenced the work, it was in the midst of the pandemic, in the height of the pandemic. It was work that was brought about because we were seeing throughout New York City and beyond, all around this nation, that people were saying it's not just enough to march in protest, and it's not just enough to believe that racism persists in policing, excessive use of force in policing, but rather people understood that racism is present in healthcare, in education, in income and wages, in human services, and more. They wanted to see change. So, in the midst of a pandemic, you try to stand up a commission and get people to testify, come out, and be heard? We were delightfully surprised that when we did these meetings, in aggregate, we saw more than 3,000 people who wanted to come out and make their voices be heard in the midst of a pandemic. And one might say, well, what is 3,000 in comparison to 8 million people? Well, those 3,000 people must have told somebody, and somebody must have been listening in, because we had more than 3,000 people flip the ballot and say they wanted these proposals.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll tell my mom you say hi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated.
All right, I'll ask again if Assemblymember Michelle Solages has come. All right, great. So next up, we will invite to the table Jacob Morris, Jerry Mikoreata, Saloni Barman, and Mitchell Grubler. Thank you. And again, everyone will have 2 minutes to present their testimony. Council members, if you have questions, please let me know. And please introduce yourself. We can start with the gentleman to my farthest left.
Yeah, my name's Jerry Mike Arenda. I'm an author.
And you may begin.
Oh, I'm going to begin? Okay, sorry. All right. If I do this right, I should have about 7 seconds left. Okay. Hi, my name's Jerry Mike Arenda, author of America's First Freedom Rider, Elizabeth Jennings, Chester A. Arthur, and the Early Fight for Civil Rights. I'd like to thank the committee for this opportunity to provide input on the development of a freedom trail for Lower Manhattan. People, especially the young, need to see, hear, touch, walk history to claim it as their own. Too many critical events and people from our heritage have been bulldozed and nearly forgotten. Let me tell you about one. In 2019, Elizabeth Jennings Graham was chosen by New Yorkers to have a statue placed in Manhattan. Earlier this year, Community Board 1 passed a resolution urging, I quote, A suitable monument to her in Lower Manhattan, where this important historical event took place. I'm here to suggest her monument, the story of the early civil rights movement, can help anchor the rich saga that a Lower Manhattan Freedom Trail can provide all New Yorkers. For those of you not familiar with Elizabeth, she was a New York City school teacher, an early feminist, and a civil rights advocate. On Sunday, July 16, 1854, she took a Chatham Street horse car bound for church where she led the choir. When Elizabeth refused to leave because she was black, the conductor brutally assaulted her and threw her off. Undeterred, she re-entered the car and the conductor tossed her out again, aided by a city policeman. In 1855, Elizabeth won a landmark case that opened transit services to all New Yorkers. Her fledgling lawyer was future U.S. President Chester A. Arthur. In 1895, she started the first kindergarten for black children in the country. I could go on, but I'll end on this statement by late New York historian John H. Hewitt. If only because she started something larger than herself, she deserves a place of honor in the history of civil rights. Thank you for your time and consideration. I yield you my 7 seconds.
Thank you.
They all go and then questions.
Go ahead.
My name is Jacob Morris. I'm the director of the Harlem Historical Society and the New York City Freedom Trail Foundation. I came up with the idea for a Freedom Trail for New York City in 2006 as part of writing a grant, the first federal grant that was ever won by the New York City, the New York Historical Society for their Slavery in New York exhibit, which created a sensation because the subject of slavery is a very painful subject. But to reopen that story and tell it as well as it did, and then also to tell the flip side of the story, which was the struggle for freedom from chattel slavery. And so I felt, that it was just incredibly important for New Yorkers and the country and the world to know New York City's great role in the struggle for freedom from chattel slavery through the Underground Railroad and through the abolitionist movement. New York City was the funder of the slavocracy. That's what it was, the slavocracy, the South, the empire of cotton. And New York City and Wall Street funded that slavocracy. But yet, there was an incredible, strong community here in New York City that fought for freedom and for abolitionism, the abolition of slavery, and the fight for equality. And people like Elizabeth Jennings Graham, and she was a young woman, exemplify that. There were so many others. I mean, for Frederick Douglass, may I have a little extra time? Thank you. My first street naming was Frederick Douglass Landing. That's where the dock was on Chambers Street by the Hudson River when he was 20 years old. And that was the name I came up with, Frederick Douglass Landing. That was 2005. And his struggle to escape from slavery, and then he met David Ruggles, who became a role model. People don't even know. David Ruggles was a role model for Frederick Douglass, and he was on Lisbonard Street. And after Frederick Douglass hid among garbage cans because he found out that New York City was full of slave catchers, which it was in the 1830s, because there were so many freedom-seeking blacks that were seeking to escape slavery, coming through New York City. No, the path north was not through New Jersey. No, freedom-seeking blacks didn't take a helicopter from Philadelphia to northern New York or Vermont or Canada. They went on the rivers and the back roads, but they came through New York City quite a large percentage of these freedom-seeking blacks. This is very profound, very inspirational, and there were so many great people. Dr. James McCune Smith, we all know about Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, and just all throughout New York City, in Brooklyn, Weeksville was a major location. It goes in Flushing, Queens, on and on, location after location. A lot of them aren't there anymore. The great creative destruction of New York City. This history should be commemorated, should be honored. We established a Freedom Trail here in New York City that's citywide as well as concentrated in downtown Manhattan. And we will have done something really wonderful for New York City and for America. And why should just Boston and Philadelphia honor their history and struggle for freedom and Constitution and stuff? Why can't we do it here in New York City? We should, we need to, and let's get it done today. Thank you.
Thank you. You can go.
Hi, good morning. Good morning. Thank you for the council for this time. My name is Saloni Bauman, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the New York Historical Society. I hold a PhD in history from Yale and have led walking tours in New York City for the last 8 years. I'm here to speak in support of 1150. The creation of a Lower Manhattan Freedom Trail is an invaluable opportunity to emphasize the centrality of struggles over slavery and freedom to our city's story. As any walking tour guide worth their salt will tell you, Lower Manhattan has a dense concentration of institutions that are notable for their place in the founding of the United States, underscoring just how intimately this history is tied to that of enslavement. For example, within a few blocks of each other are the tavern where George Washington bid farewell to his troops after the Revolutionary War, New York's own open-air slave market, and the Tontine Coffee House, where wealthy men bought and sold human lives as commodities. The first New York Stock Exchange was created in that same place in 1792. Just 1 block north of City Hall, workers excavating the foundation for the Ted Weiss Federal Building in 1991 discovered the remains that are now believed to have belonged to more than 400 free and enslaved Africans buried over 300 years ago. However, without a unifying historical narrative, these landmarks risk appearing to the average viewer as just a form of trivia from the past. A project like the Freedom Trail would make sense of these disparate sites by connecting the dots with what we in the biz called scaffolding: context, detail, and narrative structure. It's my belief and hope that someone might encounter a piece of information inadvertently on the trail and become interested enough to pursue learning more about the past. Historical inquiry, as we all know, is under attack across the United States. Book bans and state curriculum mandates forbid teachers from discussing topics as fundamental as slavery and Reconstruction. For historians, this is bad news. Our work at its best is to rigorously account for the past in the hope that a different future is possible. In 2022, New York City hosted over 56 million tourists. If we do it right, the creation of a Freedom Trail project allows us the rare opportunity to speak to them about the history of this country with truth, integrity, and care. The New York Historical Society looks forward to working collaboratively with other partner institutions who will be involved in creating the final version of this trail if this initiative passes. Thank you.
Natasha? Just want to say something. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I just want to say a quick comment.
Good afternoon. I'm Mitchell Grubler. I'm here representing the Bowery Alliance of Neighbors, and I'm speaking about Intro 1150, the Freedom Trail bill. The Bowery and Lower Manhattan were crucial in the anti-slavery movement and the abolitionist movement. In particular, on the Bowery is 134, 136, just north of Grant Street. And there are two very significant aspects to their history. One is that they're still there. One was built in the late 1700s and the other in the early 1800s. And for school children going on the Freedom Trail, they're not just going to see the site of what was there, but they're going to see these two federal houses with their steeply pitched roofs and their dormer windows and their regular fenestration, their end chimneys, and all those aspects that characterize federal era architecture. The second aspect of these houses that's so important is their abolitionist history, going back to the late 1700s. While living in his Bowery property, now known as 136 Bowery, Samuel Delaplane wrote an anti-slavery manifesto in 1793. Still living at 136 Bowery in 1795, Samuel and his wife, Phila Delaplane, were so committed to the plight of African Americans that they donated property they owned nearby for what became the Second African Burial Ground. The Reverend Spencer H. Cohen, a recognized and important abolitionist minister at the Oliver Street Baptist Church, lived at 136 Bowery from 1823 through 1825. From the 1830s to the 1860s, the Delaplane family rented spaces in 134 Bowery to circulating libraries, printers, publishers, and booksellers who promoted abolitionist materials. And most importantly, many of them were women. Now, 136 and 134 Bowery are still there. In 2015, we appealed to the Landmarks Preservation Commission to consider these two federal houses. In 2021, we commissioned a recognized historian, Suzanne Spellin, to write an extensive research and proposal to landmark these buildings. The Landmarks Commission came back to us saying that they need study. We're still waiting for that study and the Landmarks Commission to act while the buildings are still there. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Councilmember Marte has some questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being here and for testifying. I especially want to thank the New York Historic Society, because I remember being a junior in high school and going to the Slavery in New York exhibit that really just changed my mind about where I lived in, our history, and kind of made me motivated as an individual to learn more and do more. So thank you so much. And I know probably hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions of people came across the country just for that one exhibit, and it brought so much knowledge to folks. And on that point, I want to ask a question to Jacob Morris. We know that Philadelphia has a Freedom Trail. We know Boston has a Freedom Trail. And this is also an economic opportunity for our city when it comes to tourism, for people to understand our connection to this history. Can you elaborate the numbers of people that go specifically to enjoy these and learn about these Freedom Trails?
The Boston Freedom Trail is by far the #1 tourist attraction in Boston. It literally gets multi-millions of visitors every year, has all sorts of commercial and tourism tie-ins. Everybody loves it in Boston. And that's the story of America's struggle for freedom from England and our foundation as a republic. Philadelphia copied the model of the Boston Freedom Trail to establish the Philadelphia Constitutional Trail. That was pretty recently, like they thought of it about 10 years ago, and then it really got rolling about 5 years ago. It is now in the top 3 in tourist attractions in Philadelphia. For New York City to have a freedom trail with the incredibly rich and powerful theme of the struggle for freedom for chattel slavery and equality that we could establish with the right task force, establishing all the locations and inspirational stories that are here in New York City. Who knows how many millions of people would visit it every year, but I believe it would be millions and millions of people. And our school children and our society would be enriched by these inspirational stories.
Thank you. No more questions, Chair.
Thank you. Can you just please make sure you submit your testimonies so we have them? We look forward to working with you. Please feel free to reach out to my office or any other council member who is sponsoring any particular bills that you are also championing, as we hope to pass them in short order. So thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it possible I could say something on the bill regarding statutes and the Public Design Commission oversight? Very quickly.
Like 20 seconds?
Oh, I can be brief.
Okay, 20 seconds.
Thank you,
You're
Madam
welcome.
Chair. As the panel and committee ascertained, I think a little bit to its surprise, the Public Design Commission is reactive. It is not proactive. It responds to city agencies, not just anybody. Like, I can't just go and say, hey, Dr. Marion Sims, let's get rid of him, and get that before the Public Design Commission. No, no, no. It has to come from a city agency. And given that the Public Design Commission is reactive, and that's why there was, and as your co-chair so eloquently brought out, it's like, gee, what happened to that Monuments Commission? They're not around anymore. And frankly, that Monuments Commission, the one recommendation they made was to get rid of Dr. Marion Sims. They still haven't put up a plaque contextualizing a truly despicable guy, Christopher Columbus, who introduced chattel slavery to the Western Hemisphere. And he's honored with this humongous statue. There's problems with Peter Stuyvesant too. He was a bad guy. Historical research, resources. We need a new Monuments Commission that actually works harder than the last one did. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're going to have Assemblywoman Szilagyi, who is also the chair of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian caucus that I used to work for in Albany, to share some words, as she is the sponsor of the state legislation that was referenced earlier during the admin's testimony.
Hi, greetings. Once again, my name is Assemblywoman Szilagyi. I'm joined here by Joshua Joseph, who is the Executive Director of the Black, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, Asian Caucus, and really homage to Councilmember Williams for her work, and also to the committee for the invitation to discuss. I stand here in support of the two pieces of legislation, Intro 1073 and 1082, because it's vitally important. I am the proud sponsor of Assembly Bill 7691, which establishes a New York State Commission to study reparations remedies. This commission is going to hold various hearings around the states, talk to stakeholders, and come up with a non-binding report, which is going to be delivered to the legislature. It will entail recommendations for the legislature to suggest remedies in New York State, and respond to the injustices and wealth transfers caused by slavery and its legacies. This bill has passed the legislature, and we're awaiting the governor's signature. Before I continue, I want to express my deep gratitude to the legendary Charles Barron, a former colleague of ours, who with this would be no bill because he carried it prior to myself. And I also want to thank the members of the BPH caucus for their steadfast support in this legislation. It's really been quite a learning journey when we talk about reparations because there is a confusion as to what actually reparations is. It's really a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because a group of people in their identity and also their violation of fundamental human rights by governments, corporations, and institutions. Those groups have been injured and have the right to obtain from government, corporations, and institutions repair and healing. And so I'm not going to go over the 5 points of reparations in detail, but I just want to, for the record, I want to say acknowledgement of non-repetition apologies, restitution, rehabilitation, and institutional reform. I want to emphasize the critical importance of reparations, especially in light of the attack on Black history. Reparation represents an essential step towards rectifying historical injustices and addressing ongoing impact of systematic racism. And I want to emphasize the current day lens that we need to look at and have research and data looking at what's happening right now to Black communities and build on that reparations conversation. And so, in conclusion, I just want to express my gratitude to the council, to each one of you as well, for having this conversation, fleshing out the concerns, and allowing everyday New Yorkers to look at how we can improve the lives of each and every one of us. So on behalf of the BPH caucus, I thank you for your eagerness, and I look forward to working with you to ensure that we're addressing the debt owed to Black New Yorkers, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a few questions because the Mayor's Office of Equity talked a lot about the pending state legislation and wanting to make sure that there are no overlaps, and we want to make sure there are no overlaps as well, which is why we invited you to testify. We really see this as like a partnership and making sure there's synergy. So can you, from your experiences in getting the bill passed and the visions you have when the bill actually gets signed, can you share how you think we could sort of work together synergistically to carry out reparations, truth, and reconciliation for New Yorkers?
Yes, and I just want to make sure that we understand there is no overlap when we talk about the injustices. We can all work together in tandem and build a path to solving these historical injustices. And it's important on a local level, a state level, and also on a federal level that we are working in concert to making sure that we have reconciliation and reparations. And so this bill the Assembly bill creates a commission. It's 9 individuals, 3 appointed by the governor, 3 appointed by the Assembly, and 3 appointed by the Senate, who are going to come together and write a report and also do hearings and talk to New Yorkers and work with the research institutions and historically Black institutions about reparations. So whatever that entails. I'm not here to define that because we want to make sure that this work is organic, but New York State is a big place. From Montauk to Buffalo, the report is going to have to cover all of the issues. So having a hyper focus on a local level, on a city council level, will be helpful because I'm sure there are things that are going to be missed because, again, this is a statewide lens of analyzing reparations. And I want to know if the executive director has any comment on that as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for having me. I was excited to see you. I think the chair spoke perfectly and described the situation. Obviously, there is HR 40 on the federal level, which, there are still operations happening in California, Evanston, Illinois, even South Carolina. Some parts of the cities are looking at reparations. So a lot of moving parts, but I think all towards the same goal of a national reparations push. And even past that, there's an international push. You have CARICOM, who is pushing for international reparations, because reparations is not just about, this in one instance in history. It's about how it all coincided and connected to lead to the dismantling and destruction of Black families, Black wealth, etc.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions, but if you have anything else you want to add, we do look forward to working with you all, and we do hope the governor signs your bills expeditiously, because it'll definitely help shape what we do, because we definitely, again, want to be in alignment.
Exactly. And as I said before, New York City has its own history when it comes to enslavement and also its legacies. We can't forget that we have to look at every point in history and also emphasize the current day harms that are happening. And so talking to, the other day I went to a reparations meeting where all the localities that have done something with reparations convened, and it was the first federal convening of such body. And we were discussing different aspects of reparations, and it was, the conversation was also geared and was emphasized that we need to look at what's happening in modern day history and make sure that we are highlighting that with lots of facts and data to back us up. So if there's any sort of legal challenge, we are standing on current day facts. And so that's what I emphasize to the council. You know, we can look at what's happening in the past, and it's important to look at the past and let that guide our conversation. But we are looking to help modern day New Yorkers. We are looking to advance those because, again, you know, we are the arbiter of their estate, our ancestors' estate. We have all their information. And unfortunately, we cannot help our ancestors, but we can help our current day New Yorkers today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I will now invite Stephen Baines and Annette Wilcox. Oh, Stefan? Oh.
Yeah.
That's And Stefan, whenever you're ready.
Yes, thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk. I just wanted to say when we're speaking about reparations, anti-blackness, we don't need more timelines. We do not need more different committees, other additional people coming into power. The more we prolong this position, the more pessimistic we are about that, the more we're attributing and actually causing more momentum and more anti-blackness towards our people. Our people are currently suffering in extreme circumstances. Poverty, the wealth gap is going to harm our people even more. So we have to be clear about this. It's clear that New York City politicians do not want to prioritize the issues of Black Americans right now. We need to recognize that, and we need to acknowledge that, because this issue of reparations should have been handled a long time ago. And every time we bring that up, every time we prolong this issue, even though it might be necessary, we need to acknowledge at the end of the day we're contributing to additional anti-blackness by not taking any action and not implementing this ASAP. I'm the type of person to get things done now, not next year, not 2025, but clear now. We are Black Americans. What are Black Americans? Black Americans are a combination of a lineage, right? We're talking about natives, non-immigrant Black people who descend from slavery, chattel slavery in America, nowhere else. One parent of a person on either side of your family. Either it's going to be your mother or your father. Then you are a Black American. You're a predominant Black American if you have both parents, right? But you drop that lineage if you're mixed. I just wanted to also add, we need lineage-based reparations. We need to be careful of not to just spread this in water. We're not just talking about black people in general. We're talking about a particular lineage of people here in America. We need to prioritize it. And like I said, if it's not the priority, we don't want another building. I do not want another statue. My children, the people in my community, they can't eat statues. They can't eat books. They can't eat diversity. They can't eat any of this nonsense that's going on. They need tangible resources now. And I rest my case on that. Stephon Baines for the record. Oh, any questions, by the way, after you have them? No, you're good.
It should be the silver button. You just press it, and the light should go red.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, I would like to express gratitude to the committee for extending this invitation. American freedmen, descendants and their ancestors, have carved a unique narrative in U.S. history. They have endured 89 years of chattel slavery, followed by 90 years of legal segregation and discrimination, followed by another 50 years of mass incarceration. This unparalleled journey sets them apart from all other groups in the United States. These descendants make up approximately 90% of the Black African American community in our nation. Turning our attention to New York City, data reveals alarming disparities. The wealth gap in New York City, white households make White households have $431,000 in wealth versus Black households at $12,000. Black American unemployment has consistently been double or triple that of white Americans. In March 2023, white unemployment was 1.3% versus Black New Yorkers at 12.2%. The homeless crisis is concerning. African American constituents make up 57% of New York City's homeless population. With incarceration, the numbers remain disheartening. 58.8% of those incarcerated are Black Americans, Black New Yorkers. The fiscal implications are immense, with the annual cost of incarceration in New York City standing at a staggering $556,539 per individual. Given this data and the unique history of American freedmen, we believe it is vital for New York City to not only recognize these disparities, but also to implement policies that materially aid the lives of American freedmen. We advocate for the establishment of the Office of Freedmen Affairs. Echoing the sentiments of Historic Freedmen Bureau of 1865, this office would prioritize the distinct needs of the descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. New York State noteworthy strides in separating the AAPI communities into distinct subgroups. It is high time we channel similar dedication towards the Black community, especially the American freedmen. While the historical scars of slavery are frequently invoked in our discussions about racism, sometimes even used to justify broader community programs, the unique challenges faced by American freedmen and their descendants often remain in the shadows. We must transition from merely referencing their suffering to actively centering them in actionable policies that directly enhance their material lives. In closing, we fervently urge the City Council to recognize and act on the necessity expediting a bill to establish the Office of Freedmen Affairs. We are committed to this path of genuine reform and healing and stand ready to assist in any capacity. Once again, thank you to the committee for the platform. Your commitment to justice and equity is commendable.
Thank you. And I know we've spoken before, and we look forward to talking to you and working with you to see the bills get passed. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Next, we'd like to welcome Devin Prince, Michael Myers, and Kate Madigan.
You can start.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Williams and Chair Osei. My name is Kate Madigan, the Government Affairs Coordinator from the Public Theater. Since our inception, the Public Theater has had extensive social and artistic impacts on the theatrical community throughout the nation and the world. Our founder, Joe Papp, established the Public Theater as a civic institution to engage both on stage and off with some of the most important ideas and social issues. It seems only right to show our support publicly and strongly for each introduction before the committee today. As stewards of city-owned property, the public supports Introduction 0934 and Introduction 1082 that deal with historical markers and past injustices. We currently operate 2 city-owned properties, the Public Theater on Astor Place and the Delacorte Theater in Central Park, home to Free Shakespeare in the Park, both of which are part of the Lenape people's indigenous homeland, Mannahatta. In addition to operating on the homeland of the Lenape people, the Delacorte Theater is adjacent to the site of Seneca Village, their largest community of free African-American property owners in pre-Civil War New York, which existed from 1827 to 1857, when Black property owners were forced to leave and their houses torn down for the construction of Central Park through eminent domain. The public honors the legacy of Seneca Village that previously existed on the land nearby the Delacorte and supports the Central Park Conservancy's efforts to bring awareness to the history of the site through signage and guided walks. While the public has always been guided on the principles of diversity and inclusion, the Public Theater developed a formal equity, diversity, and inclusion plan in 2019, which was adopted by the board and set a course for more intentional goal setting around its equity, diversity, and inclusion work. Much like Introduction 1073, we are committed as an organization that receives funding from the City of New York to change the very wording of our administrative code. Since then, the public has made significant progress towards implementing the plan, including hiring Senior Director of Anti-Racism, Equity, and Belonging, Alexa Smith, developing a manager training program for managing people with a DEI-centered approach, holding curated all-staff sessions to create space for learning on topics of race, gender, sexual identity, disability, and concepts like the model minority myth, bystander intervention training, living land acknowledgements, and more. And finally, we want to highlight that our action is not a temporary performance. Rather, it is an intentional commitment to ongoing work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hello again, Chair Williams. I want to open with a definition. Black or African American, as defined by the U.S. Census Bureau and the 1997 Office of Management and Budget Standards, as follows: a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. Again, African American is a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. And so when we're talking about reparations, specifically 1082, here in the City Council, in order to repair a thing, you have to accurately identify a thing. And unfortunately, through no actions of the council that I know of, or any other governing body, this government took it upon itself to define African Americans as any person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. So when you have a reparations bill that is calling for remedies for African Americans, who are they? African Americans are any persons having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. So the descendants of those who were formerly enslaved, they're African American. Our Caribbean brothers and sisters that had no ancestors who were enslaved in the United States of America, they're African American. Anyone that has origins in Latin America that calls themselves Afro-Latino, Afro-Hispanic, they're African American. Anyone that has any origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa is African American. And so therein lies a problem. How do we fix it if the people are not accurately defined? And so my name is Divine Prince. I'm the president of the U.S. Freedmen Project. And freedmen is the status that was given to our ancestors after emancipation. When we look up at the ceiling, it says a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that is attributed to Lincoln. Lincoln also said, if not for the black freedmen, we would have lost the Civil War. We might be sitting in the Confederate States of America. And so those freedmen that were promised reparations through the Special Field Order 15 are the same groups of people that are the ones that deserve reparations now, because it is a promise that was reneged on. Andrew Johnson, after President Lincoln was assassinated, was able to come back into power and undo the Freedmen's Bureau, essentially, undo the Freedmen's Bank, and all the things that was promised to the freedmen. And who are the freedmen? The freedmen are those that are formerly enslaved and emancipated in America by the Proclamation of 1863 and or the 13th Amendment of 1865. That's a very distinct people. And I wish that the Assemblywoman stayed around, because she said some very important things. And we also went to, as an organization, we taught on reparations at the BPHA caucus weekend. And so we educated her and other Assembly people and also state senators on the issue of having a reparations package that tries to fix something that happened to a distinct group of people based on race. Unfortunately, as we see what was happening in the affirmative action case that went to the Supreme Court, having policy based on race is unconstitutional. We don't want to run into the same problem here in the City Council. So 1082 asks for reparation remedies for African Americans. We feel that language is insufficient. It has to be more distinct than that. In fact, in California, through AB 3121, they define their community of eligibility as African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved. I'm not in love with the language, but that is definitely more distinct, because we're talking about exactly which African Americans we're talking about, because we know African Americans are just people that have an origin in any of the black racial groups of Africa. So if we're gonna do something, we have to do it right. And unfortunately, I would hate for this body, this governing body, to copy what is going on at the state level, because that bill is heavily flawed as well. We don't know if the governor is going to sign it or not. We've had conversations with the governor and with the Assembly to let them know that saying they want a bill to do reparations for people of African descent, that's very problematic. That's race. Or it's going to turn into anybody of African descent, which means someone like Elon Musk or Charlize Theron. They're of African descent. And so we do not want this governing body to make the same mistakes that are being made, not only in the state of New York, but around the country, because she said she had a meeting with other individuals in other states and localities that did reparations, and she's correct. But if you look at the reparations package in Providence, Rhode Island, white people can apply for reparations. Now, I have nothing against white people, but they don't deserve reparations. And so if we're going to do something like that, that has to be an equity task force. That's separate. And even though there's overlap, reparations has to be very distinct, because it's for a distinct harm done to a very distinct group of people, and that group of people is the American freedmen. Thank you, and I'm here to take any questions.
Thank you. And the Assemblywoman is actually still here.
Oh, fantastic.
I see her in the back. No, I don't have any questions. I know I had an extensive conversation with you before the hearing, and everybody knows that the real work and getting bills done happen after hearings. So I just look forward to continuing to work with you and your organization as we fine-tune the bills that were heard today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Next, I'd like to welcome Robert Briggs, Lisa Betty, Marcus Burrell, and Marcus Burrell. This will be on Zoom.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of the bills being heard today, especially Intro 1082 and Intro 1073. My name is Robert Briggs. My pronouns are he, him. And I speak on behalf of a group of New York City residents and congregants at Hope Church East Village, who are deeply interested in seeing reparations paid to Black Americans in New York City. Given the centuries of federal inaction on this topic, we formed this group to consider what reparations could look like for us individually and as a church community in New York City. As discussed already, New York City actively participated in and facilitated the transatlantic slave trade. Large corporations that currently call New York City home earned unconscionable profits on goods produced by slave labor, yet so many New Yorkers do not know or understand our city's horrific, inextricable connection to slavery. As Councilmember Marte alluded to earlier, there is still much to be uncovered. We are encouraged to see that Intro 1082 would create a task force to consider the impact of slavery and reparations for past injustices. It is crucial to fully understand the extent of the loss and harm caused by the institution of slavery to properly address them. To that end, we also support the intent of Intro 1073 to establish historical facts about slavery in New York City and recommend changes for governments and institutions to prevent perpetuation of harm. We agree that it is crucial for this process to have robust public participation where the experiences and recommendations of directly impacted communities are centered. Further, we hope that the report and its recommendations will lead to actionable change and tangible economic benefit for Black New Yorkers. In support of this, our church in the Lower East Side is open to hosting a public forum as described in 1073, Section 8-1104. Our facility possesses capabilities for live streaming, media presentation, and convenient access to public transportation. We applaud the committee's leadership on taking these first steps toward reconciling the atrocities of slavery. We urge the council to vote in favor of the bills before it today, especially Intro 1082 and Intro 1073, so that the process of paying reparations to Black Americans may finally begin. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we'll hear from is Lisa.
Yes, hello. My name is Lisa Betty. I am faculty at Queens College, CUNY, in the History Department, where I'm Associate Director of the Africana Studies Program. I'm also a community researcher for the Bronx African American History Project at Fordham University, where I'm completing my PhD, and I'm representing BAHP at this moment. I would like to thank Council Member Christopher Marte and other council members for allowing me to speak on behalf of my mentors, colleagues, and students to advocate for the need of a New York City Freedom Trail, a Bill 1150, and its intersecting connection to the other bills on reparations and the needs of Black communities across New York. This trail in particular would highlight the abolition movement in New York City and have and the profound work and influence of the Underground Railroad, which, like in Philadelphia and Boston, New York City was a major stop and had a bustling network to support 19th century refugees, exiles, and freedom seekers and fugitives of slavery. Abolitionism and the anti-slavery activism in New York City is a hallmark of the city's history and leadership against the fight of anti-Black racism, white supremacy, sexism, and then the general fight against extractive economies, which at the base of those economies of course, human trafficking, captivity, forced labor, and exploitation. I think a freedom trail would give space to figures like Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Arthur and Lewis Tappan, Anna and Frederick Douglass, and David Ruggles. Those who lived, passed through, and gave speeches in this city and activated.
Time has expired.
This
Thank
city.
you.
Okay, thank you.
You can wrap up. You can continue.
Okay. Activated this city and the United States and the world against slavery. I only have a little bit more. It is my hope that this will be an intersectional collaboration with New York City Parks, the Department of Records, libraries, museums, and historical landmark spaces, and reparations committees and councils, such as Weeksville, African Burial Ground, Seneca Village. Passing this legislation is essential and vital and very much connected to the comparable legislations for anti-racism, truth and reconciliation, and reparations that we have discussed today. Thank you so much. And you have the full support of a cadre of educators, community leaders, scholars, historians, librarians, and archivists who will help in the creation and sustenance and sustainability of this Freedom Trail. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We look forward to really building a nice coalition of people. Next, we'll have Marcus. Hi, Marcus.
Hi, good afternoon, Chairperson Williams and committee members. I will be testifying in support of Bills 1082 and 1073. New York City has never atoned for its pivotal role in slavery. Enslaved Africans were the backbone of colonial New York, comprising over 20% of the population. Their unpaid labor built the city's financial might by driving the growth of banking, shipping, sugar refining, and related industries. After emancipation, Black citizens faced race riots, redlining, police brutality, and exclusion from quality jobs and education. These injustices have compounded over time. As a member of Generation X, coming of age after the Civil Rights Movement, I confronted unique challenges despite being granted full citizenship rights. Though legal victories were won, the economic and social promises of that era remain largely unfulfilled. I followed the path I was told would lead to success, attending an HBCU, earning multiple degrees, and securing full-time employment. Yes, systemic barriers to equality persisted through heavy student loan debt, lack of home ownership, reduced access to capital, and the damaging effects of mass incarceration and the crack epidemic, which disproportionately devastated Black communities. It is time to break this cycle. I urge the committee to establish a task force empowered to study reparation proposals for African Americans in New York City. The task force should be housed in the New York City Commission on Human Rights, an agency born out of the early civil rights struggles of African Americans in 1943. Input should come primarily from descendants across all walks of life, as their lived experiences must shape the process. The task force should quantify the economic injury of slavery and discrimination and propose redress methods, including but not limited to direct payments, home ownership assistance, healthcare credits, educational scholarships, justice system reforms, and and preferential contracting for affected businesses. It should also consider designating descendants of American chattel slavery as a separate protected class under the anti-discrimination protections enforced by the New York City Commission on Human Rights. Additionally, I support creating a truth, healing, and reconciliation process regarding the city's role in slavery.
Your time has expired.
Just a few more things to say really quickly. Led by and centered on descendants of the enslaved, similar to the proposed task force. The New York City Commission on Human Rights should develop a slavery labor acknowledgement like the indigenous land acknowledgement to recognize the full scope of injustice. Over 2 million African Americans currently live in New York City, many descendants of the Great Migration. I ask you to bear these sentiments in mind as the legislation proceeds through committee review. Justice and repair are long overdue, but not impossible. We must act now to remedy this unjust legacy. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I believe there's one other person that we have signed up that I know of on Zoom, Z Dempster.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you for giving me this opportunity to voice my support for the formation of the New York City Freedom Trail Task Force. My name is Z Dempster. I am president of the New York Ramblers Hiking Club. I work at the CUNY Graduate Center as an assistant director for IRIDAC and also for AFCP, the Africana Studies Certificate Program. And I'm also a board of trustees for the PSC CUNY Welfare Fund. I became an avid hiker in 2012 when I joined the New York Ramblers. I speak from experience when I say one of the highlights of hiking in the tri-state area has been discovering all the historic sites intertwined within the numerous hiking trails like the Old Croton Aqueduct and the Old Erie Path and the walkway over the Hudson. Individual New York Rambler hike members have already pieced together specialty hikes honoring the area's prominent African Americans. As a trustee for the Welfare Fund, our mission is to ensure solid healthcare coverage for 30,000 union members so they can engage in a healthy, active lifestyle. And for many years, for the past 13 years, I've had the privilege of working with the top researchers of African scholarship and American scholarship at IRIDAC and AFCP. The timely establishment of the New York City Freedom Trail Task Force is imperative. Its creation has the immediate effect of giving the trail credibility and making the formation of the trail a reality. The rapidly changing nature of New York City's real estate development threatens to permanently erase these landmark locations. They can begin immediately researching and identifying the areas that need to be preserved. Post-pandemic New York City may look very different. The timely establishment of the task force is crucial to preserving the trail before its pathways are lost forever. The task force immediately begins to establish an archive. By documenting what is found, they present proof of the historical past and give evidence of American history. They bring to light an otherwise forgotten past. The task force will be a counterbalance to the negativity surrounding the troops and the retelling of American history. The diverse and well-established
Your time has expired.
Okay, so I just want to say that it'll also improve the economic quality of New York City. It'll bring tourists and people back to New York year and year and year again. And it's very important that this task force is created. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody else want to testify? Great, awesome. I am very encouraged by all the testimony today. I know these are very difficult conversations. It shouldn't be that difficult, but these are difficult conversations that we're having as a city, as a state, and definitely nationally. And with the rise of re-envisionist history, the attack on critical race theory and Black history, I think it's so important now more than ever that we continue to have these conversations and not just speak, but do the necessary thing that should have been done very long ago. So thank you all to those who have testified, and of course to the wonderful staff here who have helped to facilitate the committee hearing. And with that, we're done.